Yo guys, what's up? This is Tom from Unreal Matter and welcome back to a new video. This is the 8th part of the Blender Beginner tutorial series, and today I'm gonna show you the rendering in Blender. And let's jump right into the rendering tab. This is our tab where we can see our renders. So in the layout tab we have the cube, and if we press F12 on our keyboard it gets rendered. If we go to our rendering tab now, we can see our result. This was rendered in Eevee. This is the standard render engine in Blender, and this is basically the render engine that is used in Unreal, Unity or other game engines too. And the other render engine is Workbench. If we do a render in here, we can see it gets rendered like this. And this render engine is basically just for visualization and we don't really need it, so let's jump right into Cycles. Cycles is a physics-based render engine. How it works is it traces light paths and creates really nice, fantastic, realistic renders. But the consequences, rendering in Cycles takes much longer. So if we go to Layout, press F12, you can see how our image actually gets rendered. And this was very slow. It took nearly 17 seconds, but we get the most realistic results with it. And now I'm gonna show you how you can speed up those render times in Cycles, and I will show you other things that may help you. So the device is set to CPU, but we can set it to GPU, so the render speeds up. Basically what you need for 3D renders on hardware is a good graphics card, because this is very essential to good renders and fast renders. So we can turn on adaptive sampling. Basically Blender's AI knows where not so much noise is and sets the render samples down. So where not much noise is, it's maybe not 128 samples but only 10 samples. And yeah, that speeds up render time a lot. What you can do too is decrease light paths. You can do this if you have not transparent or glossy surfaces or something like this. But I leave it at 12 for now. And let's render this another time. And you can see it only took a second. So we sped up the rendering speed by a whole 15.5 seconds. And that's immense. And yeah, if you want realistic renders, use this render engine. So what you can do too is motion blur. This is for animations. You all know what motion blur is. When an object moves, without motion blur, it is like this. When you stop the animation, you see your object sharp every time. But with motion blur, it gets just blurred when the object is moving. You can set the shutter manually and you can simplify your objects that your render gets more fast. But I don't do that because it can get messed up and you just don't want this. And yeah, light paths are what I said before. You can turn up or down glossy if you have a lot of glossy materials or just nothing glossy, and for the other things too. And if you have more light paths, the render just takes longer and longer. So color management is very useful too. I would say the best is Filmic or Filmic Log if you want to color grade it. It's very good in Log, so your whole rendered image is flat and you can color grade it later in a software like DaVinci Resolve or other softwares. Raw is just if you want to color grade an image. It's really useful too. And yeah, I would leave it at these three, but not standard. Standard is just very bad and you can do basically no post-production with this. So leave it at Filmic, you get more f-stops, so you get more details in the shadows and in the highlights. And yeah, for the display device, leave it at sRGB. For the look, you can set it to none or medium high contrast, medium contrast or medium low contrast. I would not recommend set it to the others. And yeah, you can adjust exposure or gamma, how it fits your scene. And that's basically it for Cycles render. There are some other settings, but I will not explain these as they are not so useful for the beginning. And let's jump back to Eevee. And here's the thing, if you turn your samples down, let's say 2, add a plane, scale it up and drag this a little bit up. Let's render it another time. You can see how the shadows are very, very bad. But your render time is so good. But I would not recommend that. If it's a good render engine, you can do good stuff with it. But turn the samples up to 64 or higher numbers. I will show you what it looks with 256. Let's render that out. And you can see how the shadows are much better. But we have the small gap here, and this gap can only be fixed in cycles and not in real time. So let's close our tab, and I will explain another setting in Eevee, that is the bloom setting. And let's turn it on. And if we add a glowing object, so let's go to shading, and under the emission, drag it up, it will emit red light. And without the bloom setting, we get this render, and with the bloom setting, we get this render, and you can really see the glow. So if you have glowing objects, I would recommend to check the bloom box. Ambient occlusion is just if you have ambient occlusion maps for better shading, so it is more realistic, and screen space reflections adds more realism to Eevee 2. So I have this nice sky atmosphere add-on here, and if I turn the sky atmosphere up and set the camera to this side, it looks like this without bloom, ambient occlusion and screen space reflections. But if I turn them on, the render looks like this, and this is much more realistic. And let's do that with cycles for the last time. And you can see it's much more realistic. We got no shading issues and got little reflections right here. And cycles looks very good. Another thing I want to mention real quick is the output. So we can go to the output properties. Here you can set your scale of your image or video, how good the quality is, so I set it to 100% every time, how much frames your clip has, what the frame rate is, and then where the output is. So for image I would render it in PNG or JPEG. For movie I would render it in AV RAW. I just think that is the best footage. It's very large, but if you compress it later and edit it in a video software, it gets just really good. And AV JPEG is just an image sequence that you can convert to video. I personally set the color depth to 16 and the compression to 0, so I have maximum quality. I do the same for JPEG, just setting the quality up and leave it at RGB. If you want to render image, you can press F12 or go to render image, and if you want to render your animation, you can go to render animation, and the same goes for audio. I hope you liked this video and it was helpful. If yes, leave a thumbs up. If no, leave a thumbs down. I'll see you next time, and bye.